The story begins with a professor teaching a class at the Regarden Magic Academy. The professor, named Edward Serfin, asks if anyone can demonstrate the concept he just explained and tells Will Serfort to give it a try. However, Will doesn't respond, lost in his daydreams. After calling on him several times, the professor finally snaps him out of it. He asks Will to demonstrate what he just explained. Will hesitantly comes to the front of the class and stares at the materials provided for the experiment. The professor, noticing his hesitation, asks why he isn't doing anything, reminding him that all he needs to do is use the catalyst to manipulate the flame. The professor remarks that it should be simple. Will attempts to summon a flame using his wand, but it fails, and the entire class bursts into laughter. Edward instructs the class to be quiet, expressing disbelief that a student of their prestigious academy can't even perform a basic spell. He remarks that this is what he expects from someone who excels only in theory but lacks practical abilities. Suddenly, a student from the class uses fire magic to complete the experiment from his desk. Edward scolds the student, Zion Ulster, for acting on his own. Zion apologizes with a smirk, sarcastically saying that it looked like Will was struggling, so he wanted to help. The professor extinguishes the fire Zion created and addresses the class, reminding them that magic reigns supreme in this world. He explains that mages are the heroes, and at this academy, magical talent is valued above all. Those who cannot use magic don't belong there, regardless of how knowledgeable they might be. He then declares that fools who cling to impossible dreams should leave the academy immediately. After class, Will is seen outside the classroom when Zion, accompanied by two of his followers, approaches him. Zion taunts Will, saying he heard that Will went to the dungeon again, and wonders if he's not ashamed to earn credits by defeating weak monsters. Before Zion can say more, a girl named Colette steps in to defend Will. She tells Zion to stop, and he questions why an honor student like her is standing up for someone like Will. Colette replies that Will is kinder than Zion and works harder than anyone else. She asks him to stop humiliating her friend. Zion, unfazed, remarks that kindness and hard work won't make anyone a great mage or help them achieve an impossible dream like becoming a Magia Defender. He then leaves, saying he doesn't want to waste any more time on someone as talentless as Will, echoing Professor Edward's suggestion that Will should leave the academy. Afterward, we see Colette walking with Will. She tells him not to let those idiots get to him, adding that Professor Edward isn't much better. Will agrees with her but admits that they aren't wrong since he really can't use magic. He jokingly mentions that he's lucky to have a cute girl like her worrying about him. Colette gets flustered, wondering how he can say such things so calmly. She tells him that flattery won't get him anything from her and warns him not to talk like that to other girls. Will, confused by her reaction, apologizes, explaining that he was taught to praise girls when he was young. He doesn't see anything wrong with it since, in his eyes, she really is cute. Colette, now embarrassed, screams for him to stop talking. She thinks to herself that she shouldn't lose her composure like that, being the daughter of a noble family. As they continue walking, Will looks up and comments on how beautiful the sky is today. In the distance, they see a giant tower. It's revealed that the 5 greatest wizards in the world, known as the Magia Vanders, live in that tower and continue to protect the sky. A bit of history is then explained. Long ago, the people of this world were trapped in darkness, unaware of the sky. They lived in fear of the celestial host. But then, 5 wizards appeared and stood up against these invaders. Together, they drove back the enemy and sealed the sky, bringing peace to the world. These 5 wizards became known as the Magia Vanders, a title that has been passed down through the ages. Every mage dreams of one day attaining this title. Colette asks Will if Hall Ice, one of the Magia Vanders from Albizvina, is watching over them today. Will responds, saying she must be. Will then recalls the past, remembering when the Ice Maiden Elfaria Albiz told him about the sun and moon in the real sky. It's revealed that the two of them were childhood friends. Elfaria also shared that they could see a beautiful sunset on the other side of the sky, which turns everything bright red. People say it's the most beautiful sight in the world. She told him that if they became Magia Vanders, they could climb to the top of the tower and witness this sunset. Will suggested they become Magia Vanders and see the sunset together, and they made a childhood promise to do so. Will reflects that while it was just a kid's promise for him, Elfaria truly had the talent. She became the youngest Magia Vander in history and reached the top of the tower. In contrast, Will had no magical talent but remained a dreamer, unable to give up on that promise, still wanting to stand beside her. The scene then shifts to Professor Werner reprimanding Will. Will asks him to calm down, but Werner is furious that he went to the dungeon again, even making it as far as the 7th floor. He warns Will that at this rate, he's going to get himself killed. Will apologizes and wonders if he at least earned some credits. Werner gives him a sharp look but acknowledges that Will defeated an evil guard and awards him 2 credits. Will, along with his cat, is thrilled to hear this. Werner then asks if Will is still dreaming of becoming a Magia Vander. Will wonders if that's such a bad thing, but Werner tells him that to become one, he'll need to advance to the upper institute. This requires a huge number of credits, along with spell work, writing, and practical experience. Since Will can't use magic, he'll never be able to earn spell work credits. The scene then cuts to Will on the 6th floor of the dungeon at night. He's confident that he can earn the 4 credits easily, as he's fought a Baskerville before. However, his cat, Kiki, seems less enthusiastic, reminding him of how she was burned by the Baskerville's breath attack last time. Will reassures her, saying they'll be more careful this time, and asks Kiki to use her nose to help locate the monster. Meanwhile, Zion and his lackeys are also in the dungeon, determined to ensure that Will gets expelled from the academy. They're convinced that if Will fails to earn enough credits, he'll be forced to leave. One of Zion's lackeys expresses concern about exploring the dungeon with only 3 people, but Zion is irritated by the doubt. The lackey quickly backtracks, showering Zion with false praise to stay in his good graces. Zion, thinking that talentless people like Will don't deserve to be at the academy, attempts to cast a locate spell to find the Baskerville. However, before he can complete the spell, another monster attacks, sending one of his flunkies flying and injuring him severely. The remaining lackey screams in terror, and Will hears the sound in the distance. Will immediately rushes towards the sound and sees Zion casting fire spells at a terrifying monster, which Will recognizes as an evil sentinel, a creature worth 10 credits. He's puzzled, as sentinels typically reside on the lower floors of the dungeon. Despite Zion's continued spell casting, the sentinel is unaffected. Will realizes that the monster is too strong for Zion, who is now completely panicked. Will hesitates, wondering if he should even help Zion, considering how Zion has ridiculed him at every opportunity. He thinks about running away but then remembers how Elfaria once called him the kindest and bravest person she knew. Will believes she was wrong, thinking of himself as a pathetic person who simply wants to stand by her side. Just as the sentinel is about to strike Zion, Will intervenes, blocking the attack. Meanwhile, Professor Edward arrives at Professor Werner's office and informs him that Zion and his lackeys have entered the dungeon without permission. Edward urges Werner to send his familiar to find them. When Werner asks which floor they are on, Edward mentions the 6th floor. Werner reassures him that there's no need to worry, and uses a crystal on Kiki's head as a relay to monitor the situation in the dungeon. Through the crystal, they see Will fighting the evil sentinel. After landing several strikes with little effect, Will finally manages to slice off one of the monster's fingers. The sentinel retaliates, but Will dodges its attacks with agility, parrying the stones the monster hurls at him. He moves with incredible speed, confusing the creature. Eventually, he stabs the monster, and Zion watches in disbelief, wondering if this is the same Will he's always belittled. Edward is also shocked by Will's performance, and Werner explains that Will is an outlier. He may not have magic, but he possesses superhuman strength greater than that of a mage, the endurance of a dwarf, and the keen observational skills to memorize attack patterns after seeing them just once. Though he cannot use magic, Will is the only true warrior in this world of magic. Will anticipates the monster's next move and successfully cuts off its hand, disarming it of its sword. He then takes the monster's sword, and as the creature fires a beam at him, Will slices through both the beam and the monster with a single strike. After the battle, he tries to offer Zion a hand to help him up, but Zion, angry and frustrated by Will's strength, refuses. Back at the academy, Edward is deep in thought, wondering how someone without magic could surpass magic itself. He leaves Werner's office, perplexed. The next morning, Werner is once again irritated with Will, frustrated by his stubbornness, but nonetheless awards him 10 points for defeating the monster. The story then flashes back 5 years, showing that Will was also persecuted by his peers. They ridiculed him for his inability to use magic and questioned why he was even at the academy. Some suggested that he was brought in to lure Elfaria to the academy and that there was no longer a need for him now that Elfaria had become a Magia Vander. They were certain he would be expelled sooner or later. One day, the headmaster, Cauldron Anuve, summoned Will to her office. She gave him a knife and then attacked him with various spells. Will defended himself skillfully, slicing through the spells one by one. Werner, who witnessed this, was astonished, and the headmaster laughed approvingly. She confirmed Will's enrollment at the academy. When Werner questioned her decision, noting that Will couldn't use magic, Cauldron explained that it was interesting to see someone with talent in both swordsmanship and magic. Will asked if he could climb the tower and catch up to Elfaria if he studied hard at the academy. The headmaster told him that he would need to work diligently and possess an undaunted will to achieve this goal. Afterward, Will and Werner left the office. The headmaster then apologized to someone, acknowledging their failure to properly support Will, and wondered about the future. The scene then shifts to Professor Werner explaining to the class that climbing the tower means reaching the upper institute, a crucial step toward becoming a Magia Vander. He outlined 2 ways to advance: inventing a new type of magic or earning 7,200 or more credits at the academy. He elaborated that only a few students manage to achieve the former, so most focus on earning credits. However, the students in his class were far from that level, barely good enough to graduate. Thus, Werner would be giving them remedial lessons. After class, Will met Colette outside. She asked if the class had been intense, and Will confirmed it was, with continuous practice tests and magic drills. Colette noted that Professor Werner was quite strict but appreciated his kindness in offering remedial lessons, which most professors would not do. She reflected that this was especially true for Professor Edward, as she couldn't imagine him providing remedial lessons. They then came across Zion and his group. One of Zion's lackeys was telling a group of students that Zion had defeated an evil sentinel. The students were surprised, and the lackey explained that Zion had defeated the monster after he had been knocked out by it. The students realized that this would improve Zion's evaluation. Zion, however, thought to himself that he hadn't actually defeated the monster but didn't voice this out loud. He then noticed Will passing by, which annoyed him. Zion grabbed Will by the collar and asked if he was messing with him. Will remained silent, and Colette asked Zion what he was trying to do. Zion let go of Will and left in anger. Colette then asked Will if something had happened between them, and Will assured her it was nothing major. The scene then cuts to Professor Edward asking the headmaster to expel Will from the academy. The headmaster wondered why he was suggesting this so suddenly. Edward explained that he couldn't be expelled at this time because it was his final year. Edward argued that Will had no place at the academy as he was a warrior, not a mage, and wanted to surpass mages through swordsmanship. The headmaster then reviewed Will's report, noting that he consistently earned good scores in writing and offered fascinating insights. If not for his inability to use magic, Will would almost seem too good to be true. Even if he couldn't become a Magia Vander, he could still be an artificer or a healer. The academy's goal was to produce learned individuals for the fated day. Edward understood this but pointed out that Will's desire to be a Magia Vander was the problem. The headmaster agreed and told Edward to test Will himself. She declared that she would leave Will's fate to Edward and, if Will failed the test, Edward would be responsible. Edward, with a mean look, questioned if she was sure about this. She affirmed she was, and Edward left with a grin on his face. The headmaster then smiled, curious about what would happen when the Dark Viper mage, who knew the most about the Magia Vander, tested Will. The scene cuts to Colette opening Will's locker with her magic, where he stored his books. It was also where Will kept his sword. Seeing it, Colette wondered if he was still slaying monsters in the dungeon. Will confirmed he was but noted that he didn't have permission to use the sword on campus and that his roommate wouldn't let him leave the dorms if he returned. Colette remembered that his roommate's name was Rosti and thought they must be close, but Will said that things were normal between them. The scene then shifts to the study hall, where Will is deeply engrossed in a book about the Battle of Garzaro. He learns that the battle was caused by dwarves from another world who were dissatisfied with their overwork. Colette, noticing his intense focus, reminds him that they already covered this in class and wonders why he's reading about it again. Will explains that he's trying to dive deeper into the topic. Colette tells him that his writing skills are already better than hers, and he should focus on other areas. Will insists he must do his best if he wants to reach the upper institute and relates to the dwarves' feelings, declaring that the power of never giving up is more potent than any magic. Colette asks if Professor Werner told him this, and he confirms that he did. Colette then notices a strand of white hair on Will and worries that he might be overworking himself. She tries to pluck the hair for him, but he declines her offer. Before she can insist, Professor Edward arrives and asks what's going on. Colette replies that they're just studying, but Edward tells Will to come to the spell hall immediately. In the spell hall, Edward announces that he will be giving Will some remedial classes because he cannot bear to see him failing at spell work. Will is suspicious and confused. Edward attacks him with a warning shot, explaining that Will's task is to land an attack on him. If Will succeeds, he will earn 5 credits, if he fails, he will be expelled. Edward prepares a spell to attack and tells Will that someone without talent like him shouldn't even consider becoming a Magia Vander. Meanwhile, Werner enters the headmaster's office, wondering why he was summoned. The headmaster informs him that she thought he should see what's happening with Will. She shows him Will fighting Edward, and Werner becomes worried. The headmaster explains that Edward is testing Will and that Werner is forbidden from intervening. She clarifies that she granted Edward's request just as she granted Werner's request to look after Will. Edward wants to see if Will truly has what it takes to be a Magia Vander. Werner feels that letting Edward test Will is too cruel, given that Edward, though he failed to become a Magia Vander himself, was a top contender. Back in the spell hall, Edward continues his assault. Will manages to dodge his attacks but notices that Edward is using low-level magic, yet his spells are still strong. Will tries to kick Edward but can't get past his shield. Edward lands a hit, but Will remains conscious and realizes that Edward is casting too quickly and without incantations. He struggles to find an opening in Edward's defense. His familiar, Kiki, is injured and leaves the spell hall. Edward informs Will that he has used only 2 spells so far, the attacking spell and the shield. He plans to keep it this way and advises Will that if he cannot master 1,000 spells, he should learn just one well, as one spell can be as effective as 1,000 arrows. Edward then unleashes a barrage of spells at Will. Despite being hit by all of them, Will survives and acknowledges the prowess of a first-class mage. He desperately wishes he had his sword. Meanwhile, Colette, still in the locker room, worries about Will and wonders if Edward is torturing him. Embarrassed by the thought of Will screaming, she sees Kiki's injuries and finds them concerning. Kiki points to Will's locker, prompting Colette to open it and retrieve Will's sword. In the spell hall, Edward tells Will that Magia Vander are the pinnacle of magic, and if Will can't surpass him, he has no hope of becoming one. He recounts the Battle of Gazero, where a single mage stopped an army of 10,000 dwarves. Edward steps on Will's head to keep him down and tells him to accept that the wand is mightier than the sword and abandon his ambitions. Will refuses to give up and declares his desire to become a Magia Vander. He pushes Edward's foot off his head and stands up. Edward is surprised by Will's determination and asks what drives him to become a Magia Vander. Will responds with a determined face that he wants to be with the girl he loves and to keep his promise to Elfaria. Edward is dumbfounded by this reason but Will insists it's enough to give his all. He vows to see the sunset with Elfaria from the top of the tower one day. Colette arrives with Will's sword, and he prepares to show Edward everything he has. Edward attacks with a spell, but Will slices through it, surprising Edward. Edward realizes Will is wielding a Moria sword and prepares to launch a barrage of attacks. Will, though afraid and shaking, understands this is the wall he must cross to become a Magia Vander. He acknowledges that he can only move forward and dodges Edward's barrage while closing the distance. He explains that despite the mage defeating the dwarves, the dwarven General Gareth managed to land a blow, proving that the sword was equal to the wand. Will breaks Edward's barrier with a single strike and attacks. Edward also prepares a spell, and after their confrontation, Will manages to scratch Edward. Although Edward is displeased, he awards Will 5 credits and leaves. Colette checks on Will, noticing he's not fine at all. The headmaster ends the broadcast of their fight, and both she and Werner are surprised to see Will land a blow strong enough to break Edward's barrier. The headmaster thinks Will truly has an undaunted will. On the outskirts of the Magical Academy dorms we see Rosti making some food for Will and she hopes that he can come back soon. Will recalls the time when Elfaria was about to leave for the tower. Before she departed, he promised her that he would definitely climb the tower one day, even if he couldn't use magic. He vowed to find a way to be with her and that they would watch the sunset together. Elfaria, with teary eyes and a smile, assured him she would always wait for him. As she left, Will cried, and told Professor Werner, who was standing behind him, that this would be the last time he cried out loud. The scene then shifts to Will distributing newspapers around the city to support himself. He meets a man named Donan, who encourages him to keep working hard and mentions he will see Will at Gina's place the next day. Will continues on his way and stumbles on some stairs. Despite almost falling, he uses his skills to prevent the newspapers from scattering, except for one. As he picks up the fallen newspaper and reads it, he discovers that Elfaria has developed 12 new types of magic spells. This motivates him to work harder. He also notices that Elfaria has placed an order with the academy. The Shin cuts to Will in his dorm room, where he asks Rosti if he can prepare a magic item for him. Rosti, curious about Will's urgency, listens as Will explains that he needs to gather ice cores from frost walkers in the labyrinth. Elfaria's order requires many magical catalysts, and students will be paid for any amount they collect. Will emphasizes that he needs the magic item to explore the 4th floor. Seeing the determination in Will's eyes, Rosti agrees and provides him with the upgraded magic item. Will thanks him and, before leaving, Rosti hands him a piece of bread for breakfast. Afterwards, Professor Werner explains that the Mage Queen Mercedes once said, "Everything comes from the dungeon," and urged everyone to conquer the dungeon using their knowledge. The Shin shifts to Will on the 4th floor of the dungeon, where he observes a number of students fighting frost walkers. He realizes this must be due to Elfaria's orders and is amazed at how her single command has mobilized so many people. He spots Zion among the students, using fire spells to blow away the frost walkers. Zion, dismissing the frost walkers as insignificant, reflects on Will's strength when he fought the Sentinel. Zion's bloodlust is palpable, and Will senses his power, concluding that he won't be able to hunt frost walkers in this area. He decides to venture deeper into the dungeon. In the deeper part of the dungeon, Will encounters some monsters attacking a female student. He quickly saves her by dispatching the monsters with remarkable speed. The girl is so stunned by his swiftness that she can't even process what happened. She notices Will and realizes that what she witnessed wasn't magic but sword play. Will asks if she's okay. She nervously confirms that she is and thanks him for saving her. He introduces himself, and the girl introduces herself as Iris Churchill, a 4th-year student. The Shin then shifts to Werner teaching a class at the academy. Many students are absent due to Elfaria's orders. Werner tells the class that creating new magic is a tremendous achievement, allowing one to advance to the tower unconditionally. He explains that new magic is often named after its creator, using the spell Dax Darence, named after the ancient mage Darence, as an example. He encourages the students to leave their mark in history by creating new magic. The students find this daunting, as it seems more difficult than it sounds. Rose comments on the morning's news about Elfaria creating 12 new spells, which she considers an unprecedented achievement, making Elfaria arguably the greatest mage in history. The class speculates whether this means ice magic is now the greatest and some consider joining the ice faction. Colette admires Elfaria's impact on the academy and wonders if she is jealous of Elfaria, fearing that Will might be taken away by her. Colette becomes flustered at this thought, and the professor scolds the students for their commotion. Colette then ponders if Will went to the dungeon today because of Elfaria's influence. Back in the dungeon, Iris realizes that Will is the book learner with no magical talent she's heard about. Will is slightly offended by this and learns that Iris is a 4th-year student. He wonders if his lack of magical talent bothers her, but she reassures him that she respects him for his talent despite his lack of magic. Iris's nonchalant attitude confuses Will, and he asks if she is also here because of Elfaria's orders. Iris confirms this and expresses her desire to help the Magia Vanders and contribute to supporting them in their mission. Will explains that Iris's description is not an exaggeration. He elaborates that the residents of their world have never seen the true sky. The sky they see now is an enormous barrier created by the Magia Vander's powerful magic. According to lore, if this barrier falls, the world will be plunged into darkness, and a calamity will begin. Students strive to clear orders from the tower not only out of admiration for the Magia Vanders but also because they believe they are playing their part in maintaining the barrier. Iris then reveals that she has met Elfaria. She recounts an incident where she was alone in the dungeon, surrounded by monsters, and felt resigned to her dire fate. However, Elfaria appeared and froze all the monsters instantly. After helping Iris, Elfaria advised her to be more cautious in the future. Iris excitedly shares this memory, her eyes sparkling as she recalls their conversation. Kiki notices something, prompting Will to investigate while Iris continues to talk. Iris mentions that she wants to help Elfaria but hasn't found any frost walkers and suspects that the other students might have defeated them all. Her search ability also yields no results. She asks Will what he is doing. Will explains that frost walkers leave behind ice shards, typically between 0.5 to 1 mm in size. He points out a shard twice that size, suggesting that a colossal frost walker must be ahead, possibly in an area her search ability can't detect. Iris is puzzled by how Will knows this despite his lack of magic, and Will responds that while magic is useful, it's not the only way to navigate a dungeon. He compensates for his lack of magic with experience and wisdom and prepares his magic item. Will soon spots the Frost Walker, which is clinging to the ceiling. He saves Iris from its attack. Iris identifies it as a Frost Rex, an advanced subspecies of Frost Walker. The monster roars at them, and Iris informs Will that it's worth 6 credits and is the boss of this floor. The Frost Rex attacks with a beam, which Will dodges with Iris's help. As he tries to confront the Frost Rex, Iris warns him that physical attacks are ineffective. She explains that the Frost Rex, also known as a dwarf killer, can freeze opponents with a single touch. Will, however, remains confident, claiming that he has defeated such creatures many times before. The Frost Rex attacks again with another beam, which Will dodges. He then runs beneath the monster, which attacks indiscriminately, while Iris and Kiki dodge its attacks. Will attaches his magic item to the monster using the wire tied to it, wounding it. He explains that the Frost Rex is weak against fire and explosives. When the monster tries to freeze him, Will lights the wire on fire, causing the bomb at the end to detonate. The explosion destroys the Frost Rex. Will reflects on how impressive Rosty's magic items are. Iris, now serious, realizes that there is a significant difference between the rumors and the reality of Will's abilities. She ponders how to report this but agrees with Will that they should head back, as they have accomplished their goal. Her mood shifts back to cheerful, and she agrees to return with him. The scene shifts to Iris walking through a grand corridor inside the tower, known as Mercedes Callis. She enters a room where 4 of the 5 Magia Vanders have gathered. Changing her appearance to blend in, Iris wonders if she is interrupting their meeting. One of the Magia Vanders, Carriot, reassures her that it's not a problem. He reflects that if the barrier were truly in danger of breaching, the world would have already been destroyed. Carriot muses that the celestial hosts might be observing them from the other side but lack the numbers or strength to engage them. Elinor, another Magia Vander, expresses concern about the need for elite mages to prepare for the fated day, or else the dire lore might become reality. She inquires if Iris has identified any potential recruits. Iris reports that she has found a no-talent individual who she believes is worth recruiting. She introduces him as Wilfort and recommends bringing him into the tower. Carriot and Elinor are skeptical of inviting someone without magical talent. Elinor in particular is dismissive, stating that she doesn't want any more inferior gods around her. Tsue, another Magia Vander, finds Iris's recommendation intriguing. He counters Elinor's objection, suggesting that even a dwarf would be considered if they were a good fighter. Elinor, displeased, points out that elves and dwarves traditionally don't mix well and questions how someone like Tsue managed to become a Magia Vander. The disagreement escalates briefly, but Carriot intervenes, urging them to refrain from hasty decisions. He mentions that the Grand Magic Festival is approaching, and they can wait until then to make a final decision. Tsue concurs, adding that talented individuals should be able to rise to the top of the tower on their own. If they cannot, then perhaps they are not truly talented. With that, Tsue concludes the meeting and departs, followed by the others. Elfaria remains, and Iris approaches her. She informs Elfaria that the boy she told her about, Wilfort, is indeed remarkable. Elfaria takes the magic core collected by Will, contemplating his potential. She smiles softly, expressing that she will be waiting for him. The scene begins with an explanation that to advance to the higher academy and become a Magia Vander, students at Regarden Magical Academy need to accumulate 7,200 credits out of the 12,000 credits offered. We see various students undergoing tests to earn credits. Zion has amassed a total of 9,889 credits, qualifying for the higher academy. Colette also qualifies with 7,340 credits. Meanwhile, Will is seen struggling in his battle against a golem. He attempts to punch the golem but is distracted by some classmates who mock him. Their taunts make him lose focus, and the golem lands a hit. The goons continue to ridicule him, stating this is typical for a learner. Liana Inez and Wignall Linder, students known for their prowess, also defeat golems using lightning and wind magic respectively. Liana has earned a total of 10,100 credits, and Wignall has 10,075 credits, both qualifying for the higher academy. Julius Reinberg uses his ice magic to plant roses in the golems and activates them simultaneously, freezing the golems in place. He accumulates 10,048 credits, securing his place in the higher academy. Liana, Wignall, and Julius are the top 3 students of the year. Julius declares a challenge to Liana and Wignall, promising to use his newly mastered trump card. He uses one of his ice roses as a glove to challenge them, but Liana and Wignall destroy the rose with their magic and accept his challenge. The other students, impressed, recognize that Liana, Wignall, and Julius are the only students with credits above 10,000. Zion is visibly frustrated by his lower ranking compared to them. Will, with only 545 credits, feels disheartened, thinking he won't graduate from the academy. Kiki tries to cheer him up, but before she can, Julius rudely demands that Will get out of his way. Julius and his lackey walk away, the lackey commenting that they expected Will to pass and speculating that he might be scouted at the Grand Magic Games. This reminds Will of the upcoming games. The scene shifts to the cafeteria, where Colette and Will are having lunch. Colette tells Will that being scouted at the Grand Magic Games is his best chance, as advancing with just credits from practical tests and writing is not realistic. She mentions that students with fewer credits than required have been scouted in the past. Will observes that the cafeteria buzzes with talk about the games. It is explained that the Grand Magic Games are held every 2 years at Regarden Magical Academy. They feature various contests, and high mages from the tower attend to scout promising talents. Colette explains that different factions will vie for the best students. The major factions are Albezvina, the Ice faction, India, the Fire faction, Ilif Khan, the Elf faction, and Thoris F, the Thunder faction, each led by a current Magia Vander. If a student is chosen by any of these factions, they are guaranteed a place in the tower. Will doubts his chances of being selected given his lower credit count compared to other students. He believes he needs to showcase impressive magic to stand out. Colette informs him that Watchers, who are known to scout talented individuals, may also attend. Will notes that Watchers are one of the 7 mysteries of the Academy and feels that as a no talent, he has little chance of being noticed. He decides to focus on supporting the preparations for the games instead. Colette encourages Will by telling him that he can change how people perceive him if he participates in the Grand Magic Games. Will appreciates her concern but remains adamant that even if he enters, he will be an athletic contestant rather than a magical one. He recalls a painful memory from his second year when he was accused of cheating during the festival. The audience had thrown garbage at him and demanded he quit, an event that started his bad reputation and still haunts him. Colette agrees that it was the worst Grand Magic Games ever and empathizes with Will's trauma. The scene shifts to students energetically preparing for the games, with the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. Colette reassures Will that even if they don't get scouted by the 4 major factions, there will still be opportunities as many scouts from the capital will be attending. Will acknowledges that the games are an excellent platform to showcase one's talents, and Colette insists he should participate. They head to the locker room, where Will opens his locker and notices a barrier spell and soundproofing enchantment on one of the lockers. Kiki uses her magic to break the spells, revealing a hidden staircase leading downwards. They hear noise from below and decide to investigate. Descending the stairs, they discover a secret gambling hideout where students are betting on the outcomes of the Grand Magic Games. The host encourages everyone to place their bets. Most students wager on the top 3 contenders, and Colette concludes that the circuit was hidden because the teachers wouldn't tolerate such activities. Will is surprised to see Zion there, who is equally surprised to see him. Colette intervenes, warning Zion not to bully Will, or she will be seriously angered. Zion acknowledges her warning and tries to ignore Will's presence. Zion's lackeys clumsily reveal that Zion is checking the betting odds to gauge how he compares to the top 3 students. Zion silences them and leaves with his lackey, frustrated. Colette teases Zion, attributing his behavior to his male pride, and Zion retorts that his lower credit count is due to a failed writing test, asserting he is as capable as Liana and the others. Later, Will attends a potions class. After the class, Colette asks him if he'd like to explore the dungeon with her, but he declines, explaining he has to work at Gina's tavern. That night, Colette pouts at his refusal. The scene transitions to Gina's tavern, located on Slum Street. Will observes the overworked dwarven miners enjoying their drinks and laughter. He works as a waiter, serving Donan, who thanks him for his service. Donan notes Will's exhausting schedule of delivering newspapers, working at the tavern, and attending the academy, attributing it to his lack of a scholarship. Will confirms he must work to pay his tuition. Donan mentions the upcoming Grand Magic Games and wonders if Will participate. Will says he's not interested, but Gina interrupts, angrily telling him to get back to work as other customers are waiting. She points out that Will's friend, Rostic, who is filling in for an absent waiter, is working harder than him. Will apologizes to Rosti for dragging him into the job, but Rosti reassures him it's no trouble, noting that Will cannot ignore his roommate in need. Gina requests that Will find another helper since one of her workers recently quit. The dwarves in the tavern insist that Will is working hard enough for 2 people, treating him like family due to his shared struggles with magiclessness. The scene ends with Will and Rosti cleaning dishes as the tavern empties. Rosti questions whether Will is sure about continuing to work in a low-paying job at a dwarven tavern. Will explains he could ask Professor Werner for a better-paying job, but he doesn't want to trouble the professor for something like this. He values the dwarves for their honesty, pride, skill, and respects their warm hospitality. Julius and his lackey enter the tavern, with Julius clearly unhappy to be in such a shabby place. His lackey informs him that no other restaurants are open this late at night. They soon notice Will, surprised to see him working there. Julius, thinking this place suits Will perfectly, remarks that he belongs with these barbarians. Donan, offended by Julius's insult, tries to react, but the other dwarves hold him back to prevent him from doing anything rash. Julius, displeased with the look Donan is giving him, asserts that they should know their place, reminding them that they fled to this world, and it was humans who gave them a place to live. It is then revealed that the dwarves' world was destroyed long ago by the celestial host, forcing them to seek refuge in this one. Unlike the elves, dwarves are treated with contempt, and Julius warns that if they ever lay a finger on a mage, their entire race will suffer. Rude as ever, Julius demands the waiter bring food and drinks. Rosti serves them beans, but Julius and his companions are disgusted by what they consider a barbaric dish, mocking the dwarves' lack of taste. Julius goes further, claiming their sweat reeks, which enrages Will. Will angrily confronts them, throwing down his apron. Julius taunts the dwarves, suggesting they should leave the country. Will walks over to their table, and they wonder what he wants, as they hadn't called for a waiter. Will furiously demands they take back what they said, explaining that the beans were grown with the skill and knowledge of the hard-working dwarves. He refuses to let them belittle their effort. Julius, amused by what he perceives as weaklings defending each other, kicks the plate of beans at Will, but Will stands his ground. Julius's lackey orders Will to leave, but instead, Will slams both of them to the ground, spilling beer all over Julius. Furious, Julius declares he hasn't been humiliated like this in ages. He uses his magic to freeze the entire tavern and attacks Will, who dodges. Julius attacks again, and Will continues evading until Julius finally pins him to the wall. Just as Julius is about to freeze Will with his magic, he stops upon seeing the defiant look in Will's eyes. Freezing him now, Julius says, wouldn't be satisfying. Instead, he demands that Will participate in the Grand Magic Games, where he intends to humiliate him publicly and freeze him himself. Will, seething with anger, agrees to participate. Rosti notices how serious Will is. Julius adds that if he wins, Will will have to quit the academy, but if Will wins, Julius will have to apologize to Mr. Donan and the others. After that, Headmistress Cauldron announced the start of the Grand Magic Games. We see Will waiting in the players' dressing room for his competition to begin. Scouts from the Fire faction, led by Raj Holland, prepare to search for talented individuals during the games. Raj advises his team to stay alert. Next, we see Liana participating in the sky race. The students notice how much faster she is than the other competitors, confident that she will win. They aren't surprised, as they expect nothing less from Miss Perfect. One student notices that their Earth Princess isn't participating in Magecraft this year. Headmistress Cauldron sees scouts from each faction already seated in the stands, analyzing everything. She thinks the tower wastes no time, and Iris, standing beside her, explains that it's because mages outside the tower are vying to recruit promising students. Liana wins the sky race and sets a new record for the shortest completion time. Iris then leaves to attend to her own tasks, mentioning that she also has a senior to cheer for. We then see Zion's friends congratulating him for qualifying for Crown Attack. Although they didn't qualify, they promise to cheer for him. Zion thanks them and recalls how he couldn't turn down Colette's request to join her team. He's happy to see that Colette has finally realized whom she should be associating with him, of course. Zion heads to the players' dressing room but is surprised to see Colette talking to Will. He wonders why Will, whom he sees as talentless, is there. Colette explains that she only invited Will to join their team because his total credits matched what they needed to participate in Crown Attack. They required 21,000 credits in total. Zion can't believe he has to team up with Will and questions why someone like him is competing in such a high-level contest. Will remains silent, not even looking at Zion but instead staring at Julius, who is standing behind Zion. Colette explains that some issues arose, and now Will has to compete in crown attack against Julius. Zion becomes angry, remembering the humiliation Will caused him last time. Meanwhile, the arena announcer declares the start of the afternoon events. Introducing himself as Mike Mayos, a 6th-year student, he also introduces his guest commentator Edward, a professor infamous for being the most hated in the academy. Mike playfully mocks Edward for being mean and demands his credits back, wondering aloud who thought it was a good idea to let Edward commentate. Annoyed, Edward angrily tells Mike to prepare a coffin. When Mike arrives at his next class, he jokingly asks the professor to spare him before resuming his play-by-play commentary of the Grand Magic Games. He announces the main event, Crown Attack, and asks the elf faction to begin their magic. A group of elves casts a large-scale spell, creating 5 distinct zones around the arena: the Marshland Zone, the Volcano Zone, the Grassland Zone, the Badland Zone, and the Woodland Zone. Mike explains that Crown Attack will be a team-based contest, with teams of 3. The participants will start outside the arena and make their way toward the stadium. The first person to take the crown, which is placed in the center of the stadium, will be declared the winner. Along the way, they will not only face the challenges of the natural zones but also various traps set by the professors. The participants can choose to head straight for the stadium or focus on blocking other teams. Mike emphasizes that this contest is the wildest and most heated in the games, describing it as a battle royale. Edward, the guest commentator, is eager to see how the students will work together to overcome the obstacles, likening it to a real dungeon dive. He also notes that this year's contest is drawing the most attention from the scouts, as top students are participating. However, Mike cuts him off, reminding him that this is a high-level contest, and several squads are vying for victory. According to the backstage gambling circuit, Squad 12, led by Wignall Linder, and Squad N9, led by Julius Reinberg, are the favorites. Mike even mentions that he's bet his life savings on Wignall's team. Edward is shocked, but Mike continues, revealing another team to watch, the squad with the no talent and Zion. The spectators consider this team to be the least likely to win, and they urge Will to stop embarrassing himself by competing in Crown Attack. As the squads head to their designated positions, Professor Werner guides them, surprised to see Will participating. He advises Will to stay away from the Grand Magic Games, but Will refuses to back down, stating that he must win this battle, even if everyone mocks him. Despite the professor's efforts to stop him, Will heads to his position. The match begins, and Julius's squad is the first to face an obstacle: a golem thicket. Other squads encounter the same challenge. Will charges straight at the golems, prompting the other students to assume it's a suicide attack, as they remember he couldn't even scratch a single golem during the spell work exam. Will signals to Colette for assistance, and she uses her magic to arm him with an earth gauntlet. With it, Will smashes through the golems, surprising the students in the stands. As Will continues to defeat the golems one after another, Professor Werner reflects that he expected something like this to happen, while another professor, Klee, explains that although Will can't use magic himself, he's not breaking any rules by using a magical gauntlet. Mike, the announcer, is speechless at Will's display of strength and announces that Will is the first to break through the initial obstacle. Zion, watching Will, is reminded of the time Will saved him in the dungeon. He recalls how disgusted he was to be rescued by someone labeled as no talent and how it drove him to train relentlessly. Despite his efforts, he now realizes that Will is still ahead of him. Will's squad enters the Badland Zone, maintaining their lead. As soon as they enter, they're attacked by a barrage of stone bullets. Will punches the ground with his gauntlet, creating an earth shield to protect his team. Before another wave of bullets can come, Colette uses her magic to summon swords for Will, which he hurls at the magic cubes generating the stone bullets. He successfully destroys most of them, but one sword misses its target. Just before another bullet can be fired, Will destroys the last cube. Mike announces that Will has just passed through the Badlands, and he expresses disbelief that the least favored squad is currently leading. The students in the stands are equally confused, thinking that Colette's magic must be the reason for their success. Rosti agrees that Colette's magic is a factor, but insists that this is what Will is truly capable of. The scouts from Raj Holland's faction are also surprised by Will's speed and strength. Edward, the guest commentator, notes that Will's movements are those of a true veteran. His knowledge and experience allow him to move with efficiency. Iris, standing in the stands, cheers for Will. Another squad, hearing that Will's squad is in first place, refuses to let a no-talent beat them and tries to catch up. However, they are stopped by the next obstacle. Other squads face similar struggles, and Will's team maintains their lead. Meanwhile, Julius notices the noise coming from the stadium and asks his teammates what's happening. They inform him that Will's squad is in the lead, and they worry that if things continue this way, Will might actually win. Julius, however, remains calm and assures them that he will stop Will. Will's squad reaches the final hurdle, known as the Enchanted Woods, where they are hit by chain circle traps. Will quickly carves into the ground where the traps are cast, causing them to destroy each other. Mike is astonished by Will's progress and sarcastically asks Edward, who set the trap, if he has any comments. Edward just clicks his tongue in frustration as Will presses on. Will realizes that the closer they get to the stadium, the more likely they are to encounter opposing teams. He anticipates a showdown in the woodland zone and plans to ambush Julius, hoping to gain a terrain advantage. However, before Will can execute his plan, Julius arrives faster than expected and attacks him, forcing Will to barely dodge. Colette is shocked by Julius's speed, and even Will is taken aback, wondering where his teammates are. He assumes they must be hiding nearby. Julius hurls several ice spears at Will, but Will dodges them all, realizing he has no choice but to face Julius head-on. At that moment, Zion loses control and unleashes a powerful spell, his entire body surrounded by fire. The intense heat melts the ice lances scattered around them, and Zion continues casting while his teammates watch in disbelief. Colette notices that Will is in Zion's line of fire and urgently tells him to dodge, but Will is too slow to react. Colette quickly shields him with an earth barrier just as Zion fires the spell. The audience at the stadium can feel the shockwave, and Mike, the announcer, wonders where such a blast came from. After the attack, Will, slightly bruised, is bewildered by what just happened. He looks around and sees that the forest has been completely obliterated. Zion then tells Julius to get lost, claiming he is in his way. Colette initially wonders if Zion's spell was aimed at Julius, but she soon realizes that Zion was targeting both Julius and Will. She confronts Zion, asking him what he was thinking. Zion replies that he's followed Colette's orders long enough but refuses to do so any longer. It's time for him to collect his payment. Zion challenges Will to a fight, leaving Will confused. He asks Zion what he's talking about, but instead of answering, Zion attacks, forcing Will to dodge. Zion coldly states that he doesn't need a reason to beat up someone like Will. Colette, realizing the situation is spiraling out of control, tries to intervene, but Julius freezes her, preventing her from helping. Distracted by this, Will is caught off guard by Zion, who manages to disarm him of his sword. Will pleads with Zion to stop, insisting that now is not the time for them to be fighting. However, Zion ignores him and demands that Will pick up his sword and fight. With no other choice, Will retrieves his sword, and the two prepare for a battle. Zion reflects on how, from the very beginning, he found Will to be miserable and eyesore. This is why he initially tried to get him to stop being such an eyesore. When Will was younger, Zion even offered to make him his flunky, but Will ignored him. Frustrated, Zion grabbed him to get his attention, but Will simply told him to move out of the way and walked off. Seeing the determined look in Will's eyes, Zion backed down, but his resentment grew. He followed Will and noticed him gazing at the tower, realizing that Will would never see him as an eyesore. From that moment on, Zion's hatred for Will began. In the present, Zion unleashes a barrage of fire spells at Will, but Will dodges them all. Zion uses a flame rope to launch Will into the air, attacking with a fireball, but Will blocks it. Frustrated, Zion asks if all Will knows how to do is dodge and block, taunting him to attack. Will, however, refuses, reminding Zion that they are teammates. He explains that in order to win and fulfill his promise to Donan and the others, he must defeat Julius, not Zion. Ignoring Will's reasoning, Zion demands that he stop talking and just fight. He launches another attack, which Will dodges again. Will begins to wonder if they truly have no choice but to fight, while the academy students observe the squads falling out. Mike, the announcer, declares this as a major upset and asks Edward for his thoughts. Edward remarks that fighting among teammates is never a good thing, regardless of the reasons, and he's confident that the scouts will reduce their points because of this. Edward, pleased, believes this will ruin Will's chances of being chosen by the scouts. Mike is surprised by Edward's glee. The scouts, observing the conflict, note that while Zion has performed well so far, his immaturity is showing. Although his credits rank 4th best in the academy, his attitude is a serious problem. The students comment that this is the first time they've seen such a dramatic falling out between teammates. Rosti, also concerned for Will, wonders what will happen next. Just then, Iris approaches him and asks if she can sit beside him. Rosti recognizes her, and it becomes clear that they have met before. He allows her to sit, and she begins cheering for Will. Surprised, Rosti remarks that he thought Iris was a shy person. Iris explains that someone introduced her to Will, and while she initially had no interest in getting to know him, she's now captivated by him. Hearing this, Rosti thinks to himself that Will must be very popular. He even remarks that Zion is so enamored with Will that he's fighting him right now. Iris jokingly asks if this includes Rosti as well, and he confirms that it does, stating that he loves Will more than anything else. Iris comments that his affection seems intense, and Rosti admits that it is, explaining that they are roommates. He also suggests that Colette likely feels the same way. Colette manages to free herself and is desperately running from Julius's relentless attacks, thinking she needs to stop Zion and Will from fighting. Julius taunts her, saying her title as the Earth Princess will be ruined if she keeps running, which angers her. Julius then attacks her with ice spears, but she defends herself with an earth wall. He triggers a nearby trap, catching Colette in it. Meanwhile, the students watching notice something strange. Julius seems to be fighting all the contestants at once. They wonder how there can be so many copies of him, as he's stopping every team from advancing. Wignall also encounters Julius on his way to the stadium and suspects he's there to make good on his declaration of war. Julius taunts Wignall, reminding him of his promise to use his trump card, but before he can attack, Wignall returns his rose to him. Surprised, Julius is momentarily distracted, and Wignall seizes the opportunity to strike, taking down what appears to be Julius. However, Wignall soon realizes that it was just a clone, leaving him astonished. Mike, who has bet his entire fortune on Wignall, is pleased with this outcome. At the same time, an elf named Lafia Voris asks another elf, Phyllis Chalia, for her opinion on the elven students at the academy. Phyllis says they're performing just as well as expected or perhaps slightly better. Lafia thinks this is a harsh assessment, but Phyllis, feeling out of place in the festive atmosphere, expresses her desire to leave. Lafia, however, wonders how she should report all this to Eleanor. The students speculate that the winner of the contest will either be Julius's squad or Wignall's squad. They believe Will's squad could have won if not for the internal conflict, but they're glad, as they don't want a no-talent like Will to win. One of Zion's flunkies is baffled by Zion's extreme actions during the Grand Magic Games, while the other flunky seems to understand what Zion might be trying to achieve. Back in the blazing forest, Will reflects on his past. He recalls how, since childhood, other students bullied him for being a no-talent. He never understood why, as he had never done anything to provoke them. Knowing his limitations, Will never sought recognition or acted selfishly. He only wished to be left alone. When Zion confronted him back then, Will simply asked to be left alone, focusing solely on his goal of catching up to Elflaria. In the present, Zion summons a fire guardian in the form of a hawk to attack Will. Will manages to cut through the guardian's wings, but it heals instantly due to its high-speed regeneration. Realizing that he needs to destroy the guardian's core, Will braces for a simultaneous attack from both Zion and the guardian. He evades one attack and blocks the other, noting that Zion is unusually using his guardian offensively rather than defensively, as most people do to buy time for casting spells. Even Professor Edward is surprised by Zion's guardian, commenting that a student's skill shouldn't be this advanced. Scouts from the Fire faction take interest in Zion as well, with their leader learning that Zion hails from the Ulster house, known for its fire magic. Although the reports claim Zion is talented, he's not supposed to be at the level of the top 3 students. The leader deduces that something has triggered Zion to surpass his usual limits, remarking on the unpredictability of students and how events like the Grand Magic Games offer valuable insights. He orders his subordinates to report this unexpected harvest. Back at the burning forest, both Zion and Will are exhausted. Will acknowledges Zion's growth, and Zion urges him to give it his all, just like when they fought the evil Sentinel. Will, however, still doesn't understand why they need to fight. He states that he has no reason to battle Zion. Zion is incredulous, unable to believe that despite all the humiliation he's put Will through, Will doesn't harbor any resentment. Will admits that he is angry and has imagined revenge many times, but his current focus is on defeating Julius, not Zion. Zion, frustrated, shouts at Will not to mess with him, admitting that Will has always been an eyesore in his view. He finds it infuriating that, despite being labeled a no-talent, Will never gives up and always seems focused on someone else. Zion demands Will to stop ignoring him and look directly at him. Will, reflecting on Zion's words, realizes that maybe Zion has always seen him this way. Zion continues, insisting he doesn't care about Will's issues and just wants him to fight. Will, who had never sought recognition, now acknowledges that deep down, he wanted someone to recognize him. If Zion is offering him that recognition, then Will decides to face him seriously. Zion, relieved to finally have Will's full attention, attacks with his Fire Guardian. Will knows that charging directly at Zion would be a mistake, as the Guardian would overwhelm him. Instead, he plans to counter the moment Zion casts his spell. Zion launches a barrage of spells, while the Guardian also attacks. Will expertly dodges, having anticipated their trajectory, and manages to destroy the core of the Fire Guardian. Seizing the moment, he charges at Zion, who is readying another spell. But before the clash can happen, Colette intervenes, creating a wall between them. Both Zion and Will are surprised by her sudden appearance and wonder what happened to Julius. Colette, frustrated, says she beat Julius to a pulp, though he disappeared afterward. The two are shocked to hear this. Zion, embarrassed, notices that Colette's disheveled appearance isn't ladylike. Colette angrily retorts that it's their fault for fighting in the first place, and that none of this would have happened if they hadn't started this mess. She then urges Will to go settle things with Julius, assuring him that she will take care of everything here. Zion, however, refuses to let her interfere with their fight, but Colette snaps back that it was Zion who got in the way first. She reminds him that this competition was supposed to be Will's chance to prove himself to the tower. Will, meanwhile, covers Colette with his cloak, thanking her, which embarrasses her and quiets her down. Will tells Zion they will have a proper fight next time and prepares to leave. Zion, angry and frustrated, yells at Will to just fight him, but Will moves on, determined to confront Julius. As Julius's squad arrives at the stadium first, Mike announces that there's no one left to stop them, and that they're on the verge of victory. But just as the crowd assumes Julius has won, Will leaps into the stadium, challenging Julius directly. The scene then shifts to Elfaria, sitting in her room at the top of the tower. A woman named Sarasa enters and notices that Elfaria is asleep. Frustrated, Sarasa wakes her up with a smack on the head and reprimands her for not acting in a manner befitting her status. Sarasa points out that Elfaria is either always sleeping or staring down at the bottom of the tower. When Elfaria finally asks what Sarasa wants, Sarasa presents her with a stack of papers, explaining that they are recommendations from the scouts regarding the candidates. She notes that there is an impressive crop this year. Sarasa specifically highlights Julius as an excellent candidate for the Ice faction, mentioning that he's currently putting on a remarkable performance at the games. She adds that Julius might even be able to become Elfaria's successor if his talents are as great as the reports suggest. Elfaria, contemplating this, acknowledges that the information might be accurate. The scene then cuts back to the stadium, where Will is preparing to face off against Julius. Mike announces to the audience that Will is about to take on all 3 members of Squad 9. Julius expresses his satisfaction that Will has managed to arrive in time, as it wouldn't have been as fulfilling to win without crushing him in front of everyone. He taunts Will, saying that it wouldn't have felt as satisfying if Will hadn't been humiliated. Will, however, remains resolute, stating that he has no intention of losing, especially before making Julius apologize to Donan and the others. Julius dismisses Will's confidence, saying that he's nothing but a rat standing before him. He then uses his ice magic to summon a thick mist that envelopes the arena. Will can sense the magical energy of Julius's team members through the mist and wonders if they are preparing to attack him. As the mist swirls around him, he notices movements all around, realizing that they are attempting to surround him. Suddenly, an ice spell is fired at Will from behind, but he dodges in time. He starts moving quickly, knowing that staying still will only make him an easier target. 2 more ice attacks follow, which he also manages to evade. Now that he has dodged attacks from all 3 directions, Will believes he has pinpointed their positions. He makes an attempt to attack Julius, but is unexpectedly hit by another ice attack from an unseen location. Stunned, Will hears Julius's voice from the mist, revealing that neither he nor his team had moved a single step. Will then realizes that what he had been tracking were not real opponents, but clones of Julius. The audience gasps as they witness 5 identical Julius figures standing in the arena. Will initially suspects it might be an illusion, but quickly understands that it's something far more advanced. Julius grins and explains that his clones are not just mere illusions but can also explode. At that moment, one of the clones near Will detonates. Will quickly shields himself from the damage, but the explosion encases him in ice. Edward, who has been observing the match, is shocked to see Julius creating multiple clones and realizes with amazement which spell he is using. Werner, another observer, reveals that Julius is using a powerful secret magic spell developed by Elfaria. The spell belongs to a series of 12 original spells created by her, and the one Julius is using is called Ars Weiss. Will recognizes the spell as well, realizing it creates living sculptures of the caster. Confused, he asks how Julius can use the same spell as Elfaria. Julius, laughing arrogantly, responds that it's simply because he's talented. Julius continues to boast about his abilities, claiming that he learned how to use the spell all on his own. He acknowledges that it may only be the first spell of the series, but he proudly declares that he has reached the level of the Magia Vander, a prestigious rank among mages. Julius belittles Elfaria, saying her achievements aren't special and vows that one day he will strip her of everything she has. Hearing this, Will becomes enraged and breaks free of the ice imprisoning him. He charges directly at Julius, but Julius and his clones begin attacking with a barrage of ice boulders. Will effortlessly cuts through each one. As Julius continues casting spells, he boasts about his control over his clones, stating that he can move them at will and have them cast spells independently. Meanwhile, Julius's teammates note that if Will remains in one place for too long, he's bound to lose. Suddenly, Julius halts his offensive and uses his clones as anchors to trap Will inside an ice barrier. Will attempts to slash his way out, but the barrier remains unscathed, much to his frustration. Realizing he's trapped, Will braces for Julius's next move. Julius, full of confidence, remarks that hunting a wild animal on a rampage is easy. He prepares and launches a massive ice bolt at Will, declaring that this will end the fight. The entire arena watches in stunned silence as the powerful attack unfolds. Mike announces that Julius seems to have won the battle without even having to move from his spot. Edward comments that this kind of calculated, immobile victory is the pinnacle of magecraft, and he now understands why Julius has earned over 10,000 credits. Julius then uses his wand as a microphone, speaking directly to the scouts. He boasts that he is capable of mastering Albaz Vanina's spell on his own, and he proudly declares himself the successor of Elfaria. The students in the arena are in awe of Julius, believing that no one can beat him if he has mastered such powerful magic from the legendary Magia Vanders. Iris, however, sees through his tactics. She explains to Rosti that this entire battle has been a demonstration, cleverly orchestrated by Julius. He leveraged Will's immense strength and agility to make himself look even more powerful. While she admits that his strategy is clever, Rosti comments that Julius will look foolish if he ends up losing now. Afterward, Will breaks out of the ice boulder, and Julius is in awe. Will thanks Julius for the ice spell, as it helped him cool his head, and he mentions that he tends to get worked up when it comes to Ali. Julius, annoyed by Will's babbling, declares that he's going to put him down for good this time. He and his clones attack Will with their spells, but Will manages to dodge them and quickly takes out Julius's teammates. Edward recognizes this technique as the same one Will used against him, and the crowd is thrilled by the upset. Julius's ice clones then begin to crumble, and the audience wonders what's happening. Will explains that Julius was relying on his friends to help control the clones, and that's the only reason he was able to maintain the Elfie spell for a short while. Will tells Julius that he is nowhere near her level. Meanwhile, back at the tower, Ali considers the possibility that Julius could become her successor if the reports are accurate. However, she notes that what she desires by her side is a sword, not a successor. Will then comments that Julius's Ars Weiss isn't perfect, explaining that unlike autonomous guardians, Ars Weiss is controlled entirely by the caster, and his teammates were the reason Julius could control his clones. Furious at being lectured by someone without magic talent, Julius attacks Will by sending roses at him. Will slices through them, but Julius causes the roses to explode. Will defends himself against the blast, and Julius creates 4 clones once more, attacking Will with magic spells from all directions. Will either dodges or counters each attack. Julius admits that he isn't yet skilled enough to control 4 clones at once without his teammates' support and that the spell is draining his energy fast. However, he believes Will never figure out which of the clones is the real one, as they are perfectly identical. Julius laughs, thinking Will be helpless against his spell, but Will charges at him, catching him off guard. Julius quickly creates an ice wall to protect himself, but Will breaks through it with his sword, and one of the ice shards hits Julius. Surprised, Julius asks how Will figured out which one was the real him. Will explains that the body temperature of Arsweiss clones is the opposite of the caster's, typically around 36 or 37 degrees Celsius, and sometimes even lower, depending on how the spell is cast. If the caster isn't fully in control, cold air will radiate from the clones, causing ice crystals to form around their feet, just like with frost walkers. Julius realizes Will is right as his clones crumble once again. Julius is baffled that a no-talent like Will knows more about the spell than he does. Will reveals it's because Elfaria, the creator of the spell, is his childhood friend. They were both abandoned and grew up in the same orphanage, which is why he knows so much about her magic. Though he could never match her abilities, he admires her and studied her magic deeply. From the tower, Elfaria reassures Will that their memories and hard work won't be in vain. Will then tells Julius he knows all the strengths and weaknesses of Elfaria's magic. Frustrated and restless, Julius angrily declares he won't let someone like Will mock the magic of a Magia Vander. He attacks Will with an ice spell, but Will effortlessly cuts through it. Impressed, Will praises Julius for being amazing, acknowledging that no other mage has ever used Elfaria's magic. However, he also points out that Arsweiss is a spell Elfaria created when she was only 2 years old. Hearing this, Julius begins to feel hopeless, as Will tells him the spell is flawed and easy to counter. Will mocks Julius for boasting about something a 2-year-old created, likening him to a naked king. Julius, shocked and embarrassed, realizes how foolish he's been. Enraged, Julius creates 7 clones of himself, determined to defeat Will with sheer numbers. He casts several ice spells at once, but Will calmly reveals that this is nothing compared to when he was bullied by 10 of Elfie clones as a child. Vexed, Julius launches his attack, but Will dodges every spell and quickly takes down one of the clones. Julius frantically tries to control his remaining clones to stop Will, but Will destroys them all, effortlessly dodging or blocking their attacks. After defeating all the clones, Will approaches Julius and punches him in the face, knocking out one of his teeth and rendering him unconscious. The crowd is stunned by what they've just witnessed. Mike announces Will's victory, astonished that a no-talent has defeated someone with over 10,000 credits. Rosti is equally shocked at the unexpected outcome. Lena takes note of Will, and soon after, Colette and Zion enter the area. Mike announces that Will only needs to retrieve the crown to secure his victory. However, before he can, Wigil unexpectedly picks up the crown and places it on his head. Everyone is stunned, and Mike declares Wigil as the winner. With that, the Grand Magic Games come to an end. Sarasa informs Elfaria of the outcome, and we see that Elfaria is too ashamed to show her face. She wonders if there's a spell that could erase memories or send her back to the past. Sarasa mentions that there might be a forbidden spell for that, but she won't let Elfaria use it. Elfaria, with teary eyes, insists that Will is wrong. She wasn't bullying him, she just wanted to keep him all to herself so they could play together all the time. She is devastated that the students now know about her dark past. Back at the arena, Zion is surprised that Will managed to defeat Julius. He leaves, determined to one day defeat him. Colette asks Will if he's alright. Will apologizes to her for their loss, but says that, at the very least, he was able to fulfill his promise. The scene then cuts to Gina's tavern, where the dwarves are celebrating Will's victory. They eat and drink together. Colette, Rosti, and Professor Inner are also present. After the celebration, Donan asks Will if he was scouted by the tower, and Colette informs them that he wasn't. She explains that they not only had a falling out but also didn't manage to win the event, placing the blame on Sion. Rosti then asks Will why Sion isn't attending the party, and Will mentions that he invited him, but Sion chose not to come. Donan remarks that it's fine since Will won the fight and received a proper apology. Meanwhile, Julius is cleaning plates in the tavern, wondering why he has to work in a dwarf's tavern. Gina tells him they are short on employees and urges him to hurry with the dishes and take some beans to one of the tables. Julius is already frustrated about not being scouted because he lost to Will, so he takes the beans out in a hurry. Seeing him, Colette thinks he got what he deserved and notices Unner looking worried. Colette questions whether they should have had a party, and Unner states he won't stop them but he is concerned about how Will handle things from tomorrow onwards. Now that he has entered the festival and showcased his power, Colette believes everyone should see him in a new light. Unner, however, points out that things won't be so simple. Afterward, we see some students at the academy expressing concern about the upcoming all-student practice, explaining they will have to dive into the dungeon for a week. They believe they need to form a party and hope to team up with someone strong. Meanwhile, Will is walking down the halls with Colette when a group of students approaches him, asking him to join their party for practice. Confused, Will listens as they acknowledge his strength and invite him again. Just then, more girls arrive, asking Will to join their party instead. This sparks an argument among the students about who will have Will on their team. As more students come to invite him, Will finds himself backed into a corner. At that moment, the top students of the academy walk by, and Tsue looks vexed by the scene. Colette observes that these students are interested in Will after seeing what he can do, and she wonders if this is what Professor Inner meant. She intervenes, calling the students shameless for asking Will to join their party after having bullied him. She mentions that Will must be angry, but we see he is actually excited to be invited by so many students. He wonders if this means they consider him a friend. Colette thinks this might be a side effect of being starved for friendship for so long. The girls asking Will to join their party tell Colette to stay out of it, accusing her of wanting to keep Will for herself. They take his hand and mention splitting the dungeon credits with him. Colette steps in, stating that Will already has plans to go shopping with her tomorrow. Later, we find Colette in her room, embarrassed about getting carried away earlier. She reflects that it sounds like they're going on a date, prompting her roommate Rose to ask what she's planning for it. Colette insists it's not a date, but Rose advises her to prepare anyway, or it might be rude to Will. Colette agrees, realizing she should be considerate. Meanwhile, Will is in his room when Rosti asks if he's going to the dungeon tomorrow since there are no classes. Will replies that he's going shopping instead, explaining he was half forced to agree to it. He reveals that Colette convinced him to accompany her to get equipment and items for the all-student practice. Rose wonders if Will is really going with Colette, and Will confirms this, which angers Rosti. Next, we see Colette waiting for Will at the city plaza, feeling nervous as she thinks this is no different from a date. She decides to make it feel like one, even if it's not. When Will arrives, he mentions he intended to come earlier but she beat him to it. Colette says she just got up early, and Will notices she looks great in her dress and hairstyle, which makes his heart race. Embarrassed, Colette thanks him. Just then, Rosti shows up and apologizes for being late. He introduces himself to Colette and expresses excitement for the day. When Colette asks Will what's going on, he explains that Rosti was insistent on coming along, and he couldn't refuse. Rosti adds that it's better to have a larger group while shopping and leads Will by the hand. Colette feels jealous seeing Will and Rosti holding hands, and Rosie teases her about it. The three of them visit various places, but Colette struggles to close the distance between her and Will, as Rosti constantly keeps Will in his sights. Frustrated, Colette is annoyed that Rosti is always so close to him, making it hard for her to enjoy her time with Will. In the afternoon, Colette and Will sit on a bench. Will notices that something seems off and asks her about it. Colette wonders why Rosti never leaves Will's side and questions if he's really just Will's roommate. Observing Rosti's handsome face, she even considers whether he might be a woman. Will reassures her that Rosti is definitely a boy, joking about his size and mentioning that Rosti has always been quite handsy since they met. Rosti then returns with drinks for them but has none for himself, explaining he plans to share Will's drink. Colette offers to share hers instead. Rosti then remembers that Will needs to get his sword maintained and tells him to go ahead without them. Will hesitates, but Colette agrees, mentioning that the dwarves might not be pleased if mages like them show up at the forge. After Will leaves, Colette asks Rosti if he feels more than friendship for Will. Rosti pins Colette to the bench, declaring that he loves Will more than anyone else and that his feelings are deeper than hers. Enraged, Colette tries to assert her dominance, reminding Rosti that she and Will used to hug all the time until 4 years ago. Rosti acknowledges this but adds that unlike her, he has bathed with Will, stating they still do so every night. Colette wonders what he means, but Rosti leaves it to her imagination, intensifying their argument. As they head to the forge, Will reflects on how strangely both Colette and Rosti have been acting. He is approached by Liana, who asks if he has a moment to spare and leads him to a cafe. There, he notices Wignall, Julius, and Tsue gathered as well. Liana announces that it's time for the all-student praxis and proposes forming a party with the best mages, including the standout from the festival, who she believes will help them in the dungeon. Julius doubts her judgment, arguing that bringing someone who can't use search magic will only slow them down. Tsue also expresses his reluctance to be in a party with Will. Wignall comments on their bitterness over losing to Will and acknowledges that, despite lacking sophistication, Will has both the strength of dwarves and the agility of a monster. This, he argues, is what matters most. Julius reminds Wignall that he is also behind Leanna in credits, to which Wignall responds that he respects her opinion. He is willing to accept a no talent if Leanna sees potential in him, asserting that he is different from Julius and Cyan, who are visibly angered by this. Leanna explains that she wants to use all of them to rise up the tower as top students, seeking more fame, honor, and a better future. Will then asks her if she didn't get scouted at the festival. Leanna mentions that the Thunder faction did reach out to her, and Will wonders why she is going through all this trouble. Leanna explains that those still in the academy are the leftovers, inferior to those who have already ascended the tower. She elaborates that she comes from the Enos family, where members generally die young. To prevent her family's ruin, she needs to deliver overwhelming results. Simply ascending the tower won't be enough. She aims to become a Magia Vander and believes she's not the only one with ambitions in the room. She asks everyone who agrees with her proposal to drop their coins into the goblet in front of them, and they all comply, knowing there's no other party capable of earning more credits. Afterward, we see Colette and Rosti looking for Will, finally finding him. They wonder where he has been, and he tells them he'll be joining Leanna's party for the all-student praxis. The next day, Professor Unner informs the students that the all-student praxis will begin in 10 days. He mentions that floors 7 to 10, which are usually off-limits, will be opened for this event. They will face over 5 to 10 enemies, with the opportunity to earn more than 1,000 credits at once, and even more if they manage to defeat any of the floors. This is their chance if they hope to ascend the tower. He states that, in theory, they can earn full practice credit through this event. Afterward, Edward warns the students to be careful, as they might even lose their lives. He explains that last year, 4 students were eaten by monsters. Although professors will be stationed in the dungeon, this has never stopped students from meeting grim fates. He advises them not to play the hero or act recklessly. Later, the students gather at the base camp on the 6th floor of the dungeon. Leanna asks Colette why she is tagging along, as she didn't invite her. Colette insists she won't join if Will is going, and Leanna doesn't mind. Will and Colette then talk to Rosti, who reveals that he will be staying behind since artificer students are not allowed to go any deeper. Will reassures him, stating he has prepared plenty of magic items for him, and Rosti wishes them luck. The students gather around as Edward explains that the all-student praxis is different from ordinary practice, it's a survival challenge within the dungeon. He tells them there are base camps set up on every floor and advises them to check their maps to find them. If they choose to discontinue or retire, they should ensure they get to safety, as professors will be standing by to assist if needed. He then announces the start of the practice. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the dungeon, a man tries to retrieve something, incredulous that he has to do this during the all-student praxis. He thinks he has no choice but to slaughter anyone he encounters. The scene cuts to one of Carriot's subordinates informing him that the date for the all-student practice has been decided. Carriot responds that he doesn't need to hear every little detail and expresses his reluctance to act as a representative of the Magia Vanders, even temporarily. The subordinate, Logwell, insists that there is no one better suited for the role. Carriot then inquires about the king's return, only to learn that he has not yet returned. Concerned, Carriot thinks that this situation is not good, as the barrier is on the verge of disappearing. Back in the dungeon, everyone rushes in as the all-student practice begins. Will is determined to achieve results and reach Elfaria. At Leanna's request, Wignall uses his wind magic to propel their party forward. They fall to the next floor, and Wignall uses wind magic to help everyone land gently. As they move ahead, they encounter a swarm of crimson ants. Will thinks it's his time to shine, knowing that mages are at their weakest in close combat, but Wignall stops him, asking if he knows what Leanna's family is known for. Leanna charges at the monsters with lightning-fast speed, taking them out with her lightning magic. Afterwards, Wignall explains that the Enos family is known for their knights, and Leanna is a rare type of mage who specializes in close combat magic. Leanna then tells everyone that competing for credits will be troublesome, emphasizing the need to get ahead of other parties quickly. Will remembers that Professor Unner once asked him which magic is the most important in the dungeon. When he didn't know the answer, Unner told him it was search magic, a common spell used to detect enemies and anomalies essential for mages diving through dungeons. Back in the present, Will and the others continue fighting the remaining crimson ants, but they are so fast that Will struggles to contribute. He realizes that their search spell has a wider range than his detection skill, and fears they will defeat all the monsters before he can engage. Finally, Will manages to target one of the monsters, but Wignall uses his wind magic to wipe out all the remaining ants at once. He remarks that Will is more of a dead weight than he expected, questioning Leanna's judgment in asking him to join their party. Leanna defends Will, suggesting he hasn't had the chance to prove himself yet but will show his true worth when they face 5 or more enemies. She hopes she's right and reassures herself that Will is probably strong enough, even if he seems like dead weight for now. Meanwhile, Julius absorbs the magical traces from the defeated monsters into his wand, warning Leanna that those who can't use search magic will only hinder them. Will explains that by absorbing magical traces, one can store a record of the battle, allowing the Academy to verify the monsters killed and the credits they will award. The others try to leave while Will is still picking up dropped items. Colette asks them to stop, but they insist there's no need to collect such worthless loot. Will quickly joins them once he's finished, explaining that most people don't want to team up with him because he needs to pick up drop items, unlike the others. Colette asks if he's alright, and he assures her that he is, mentioning he expected this from the beginning. He tells her he will do his best to help in other ways, but he can't fight the monsters ahead. As they move forward, Will feels overshadowed by his talented teammates and worries he'll become a burden. After a few hours, Leanna notes that a day has passed since the practice began and suggests they take a rest. Julius expresses discomfort about resting in the dungeon, preferring a sense of security. In response, Wignall erects a fiery wall around them. Colette wonders if this is illusion magic, but after touching the flames, Will realizes it's an illusion, which is keeping the monsters outside. Leanna asks Will to distribute the rations she gave him. He hands out the portions, but when he tries to give Wignall his share, Wignall stops him from getting closer, insisting he leave the rations on the ground. Wignall explains that he only allows those he deems worthy to approach him. Colette calls him out for his rudeness, but Wignall asserts his superiority as an elf, claiming that the only one worthy is Leanna. He halts Colette from confronting him, explaining that elves have their customs and beliefs. He elaborates that, like the dwarves, elves come from another world and are a magical race, albeit a bit snobbish. They possess greater magical talent than most mages, and their queen is one of the Magia Vanders. After they eat, Leanna shares her plan. She emphasizes that their top priority is to defeat the luminous Nabarus, worth 110 credits and the floor keeper of the 10th floor. Will realizes this is the highest credit they can earn from a single monster during the practice. The others mention that it's common for mages to die facing this boss. Leanna assures them she assembled this party to take down the creature, confident in their ability to succeed and wanting to prove this to the tower. Wignall questions whether it's wise to ignore other monsters on the way to the final boss. Leanna explains that they need to conserve their magic for the encounter with the beast and can deal with the smaller monsters later. She instructs everyone to take the shortest route to the 10th floor. Will reflects that he has only collected 5 credits so far, worrying this isn't sufficient, but he steels himself to face the floor keeper. Elsewhere, a man named Headless speaks with his partner, who asks if he has killed the people upstairs. Headless confirms he has and mentions they were becoming a nuisance. Meanwhile, Will and the others continue their exploration and reach a lower floor, noticing many monster corpses. Julius wonders if another party was responsible for this, but they dismiss the idea, certain that no other students could have made it here before them since they took the fastest route and didn't stop at any base camps. Examining the corpses, Will realizes there are no signs of magic used, the monsters were torn apart by brute force. Leanna notices Nabarus' room ahead, and as they enter, Will feel uneasy because the quiet of the dungeon deepens. They're shocked to find Nabarus' corpse. Using search magic, they detect traces indicating the death occurred recently. Leanna recalls that while search magic is powerful, it has limitations, particularly against crafty traps and certain monsters that can evade detection. Will employs his own detection skills and senses a monster above them, alerting the group just in time. The monster attacks, and though Will tries to block it, he fails to defend fully. In a single swing, the creature knocks Wignall out cold. As the mages attempt to retaliate, the monster collapses the floor beneath them, causing everyone to fall. Will manages to catch Wignall, who is unconscious, and they plummet to the 11th floor. Meanwhile, Julius and Cyan, also on the 11th floor, are stunned. They know that this level is a danger zone only high-level mages can survive. Leanna and Colette find themselves elsewhere on the same floor. Leanna, bleeding from a head injury sustained during the fall, reassures Colette that they need to regroup with the others, as remaining alone is perilous. Meanwhile, Will faces a giant snake monster. As he battles it, Wignall dreams of his past, haunted by voices calling him useless for his inability to cast an illusion spell. He awakens from the nightmare to see the snake's corpse beside him. Relieved, Will asks if he defeated it solo. When Will attempts to treat Wignall's injuries, Wignall refuses his help, insisting he can manage on his own. Will, undeterred, reminds him that they can't afford to leave each other in this state. After treating Wignall's arm with supplies, Will discovers that their medical kit has been ruined. They have 3 sub-weapons and enough food and water for 2 days, but under the harsh conditions of the 11th floor, survival might only last a day at most. Will insists they must find Colette and the others, arguing that waiting for rescue is futile given the lurking monster from earlier. Meanwhile, Professor Unner contacts Professor Eliza on the 8th floor, where she fights off monsters amid chaos. She reports a stampede has ravaged the base camp, and all the other teachers have been killed, their heads ripped off. She hasn't heard from the 9th floor or below, but suspects the situation is dire. Unner concludes that this can't be a coincidence and decides to cancel the all-student practice, heading down to rescue the students. Back on the 11th floor, Will and Wignall navigate the area. Wignall repeatedly uses search magic, but Will warns him against overusing it, fearing depletion of his magic power. Wignall, however, insists on remaining vigilant against ambushes. Will suggests they conserve magic by using search at intervals of 140 meters to detect distant threats, while he handles nearby enemy detection. He assures Wignall that he and Kiki will deal with any ambushes, emphasizing the need to avoid unnecessary fights. Surprised by Will's calm demeanor, Wignall learns that Will relies on his experience from having studied the dungeon extensively and having been stranded numerous times. As Will spots enemies approaching, he recognizes them as 3 swine demons called Jiza. They have no choice but to engage, as the alternate route is also swarming with monsters. Will instructs Wignall to handle the one behind them while he takes on the 2 in front. Wignall successfully knocks down one demon using wind magic, while Will effortlessly slices through the 2 in front. Impressed by Will's swift moves, Wignall reflects on how Will has transformed his wisdom into power, feeling inferior in comparison. Suddenly, the monster Wignall tripped earlier lunges at him. Lacking time for a proper counter, he resorts to a fire illusion, but Will warns that the Jiza have a keen sense of smell, making illusions ineffective. Just as the monster bypasses the illusion, Will throws a dagger, slicing the Jiza in half. Wignall laughs bitterly at his blunder, but Will reassures him, insisting he'll get it right next time. Wignall, feeling defeated, confesses that he's not talented, he's just a flunky. The scene shifts back to the past, where Wignall trains his illusion magic. Frustrated, he struggles to perfect it, fearing he'll never catch up to Elinor. He practices tirelessly, unaware that Will's shadow watches him. In the present, Wignall laments once more that he's just a flunky, the only elf remaining at the academy after 6 years while others have advanced to the tower. He feels like a disgrace to his race, having been labeled a flunky countless times. Despite the purpose of illusion magic being to materialize things like those spectacular displays at the Grand Magic Games, his illusions lack physical form. Will, trying to uplift him, reminds Wignall that he possesses talent, ranking among the top students in their class. Wignall recalls Leanna's earlier comment that those still at the academy are merely leftovers, amplifying his feelings of inadequacy. Meanwhile, Leanna confides in Colette, expressing her belief that true talent transcends the graduation process. For 6 years, she's watched others surpass her, realizing they're nothing but leftovers compared to those who advance. Colette counters that Leanna is talented too. People call her Miss Perfect. Leanna retorts that this recognition is limited to the academy, she's merely a big fish in a small pond. The reality hit her when a first-year student, her own age, advanced to the tower and became a Magia Vander. Colette recognizes that Leanna is referring to Elfaria. Back with Wignall and Will, Wignall reveals that the first person to make him feel inferior was his foster sister Elena, the queen of the elves and a Magia Vander. They grew up close, but when he proudly showcased his wind magic, she surpassed him effortlessly, demonstrating her innate talent. She became a high elf capable of creating Kingswood, and after her Ascian, they were separated. Wignall worked hard to catch up, but he only felt like a flunky, unworthy of her greatness. Will, listening intently, realizes that this sense of inferiority is what binds them. Wignall questions whether Will is trying to comfort him, asserting that he's just a deadweight. He urges Will to leave him behind, but Will refuses, insisting that Wignall is an incredible elf. He vows to protect him until he can regain his strength. Meanwhile, Colette tells Leanna about a boy who has faced ridicule for lacking talent but has persevered. Leanna realizes Colette is talking about Will, noting that he would laugh off such self-loathing if he heard it. The scene shifts to Will, battling monsters while searching for the others. Observing the relentless enemies, Wignall reflects on how they've encountered nothing but overwhelming foes. He marvels at Will's ability to keep pace, astounded by the number of monsters he has already slain. Wignall wonders about Will's stamina and checks in on him. He notices Will is beaten up, having endured injuries to protect him. Confused, Wignall questions why Will doesn't look down on him like his kind do. Will replies that he knows Wignall is not a disgrace, just misunderstood. Suddenly, a strange sound echoes through the dungeon. Wignall uses his search magic, but the spell fails to detect anything nearby. Will realizes the strange sound signals the dungeon's creation of more monsters. Above them, a cocoon releases a viscous liquid, and fiery creatures emerge. Baker, notorious monsters unique to this floor. Will immediately recognizes the danger and throws the bombs Rosti gave him, retreating with Wignall to shield themselves from the explosion. Wignall, bewildered, asks about these monsters. Will explains that Baker are worth 11 credits each but are immune to physical attacks and possess high magic resistance, making them natural enemies of mages. He stresses that only elven illusion magic can affect them. Now that they've seen the Baker, they have no choice but to fight. Will urges Wignall to help, but Wignall feels unprepared, overwhelmed by his perceived inadequacies. As tears well up, Wignall laments that he'll just fail, no matter how hard he tries. Will reassures him that failure is part of the journey, and they won't progress without embracing it. Wignall fears for Will's life if he fails, but Will insists he won't die because they share a common dream, reaching Elena at the tower. Wignall recalls Will's earlier encouragement and realizes that while they may share the same dream, their determination differs. Will charges at the Baker, attacking them with his sword, but his strikes have no effect. The monsters seem near immortal. Seeing Will struggle motivates Wignall, and he casts a wind-type illusion spell, but it fails to affect the Baker as he expected. Just as one of the monsters prepares to unleash an attack on Will, Kiki intervenes, blocking the spell. Will reminds Wignall of his own strength, affirming that all his hard work has not been in vain. He expresses his belief in Wignall, which surprises him. No one from his kin has ever shown him such faith. Determined to prove himself and not live in fear of his kin's mockery, Wignall decides not to betray Will's trust. He casts another illusion spell, successfully taking out the Baker. Will commends him for the effort, and Wignall humbly apologizes for his earlier rudeness, acknowledging Will as a warrior worthy of respect. Will, in turn, admits to having respected Wignall all along, having observed him during training. They share a handshake, solidifying their bond. Will then pours his blood onto a map, explaining that it's a seeker's map that uses the user's blood to create a layout of the area. Wignall realizes that Will has been strategically navigating the dungeon all along. Will informs him that Kiki has been tracking Colette and the others by remembering their scent. Meanwhile, we see Julius asking Cyan for water after they finish off some monsters. Cyan warns that water is precious and should not be wasted. He suggests Julius melt some of his ice if he's thirsty, but Julius retorts that he can't afford to waste magic. Their argument escalates before they calm down, and Julius notes that Cyan has become overconfident lately, despite their elemental incompatibility. It stings even more that they've been bested by someone they deem a no-talent. Cyan pushes Julius into a corner, urgently warning him that enemies are approaching. Julius, skeptical since his search spell didn't detect anything, is reminded by Cyan that monsters can evade detection, a lesson they learned on the 10th floor. As they survey their surroundings, a swarm of evil sentinels appears, shocking Julius at their numbers. He wonders if this mass outbreak is linked to the earlier monster. Cyan calmly strides toward the sentinels, instructing Julius to use his clones as distractions. Julius protests, astonished that Cyan plans to face so many alone. Cyan, fueled by the humiliation inflicted by these monsters, is determined to burn them all. The scene shifts to students on the 8th floor, fleeing from sentinels. One student trips, and the sentinels close in, but Edward arrives just in time, decapitating the monsters with ease. He orders the students to evacuate to the 6th floor and asks the faculty for assistance, which they readily agree to. Edward then takes off on a dragon with Unner, who explains they've managed to evacuate most students, highlighting their luck in not having advanced past the 8th floor. He mentions only one party has made it further, reportedly heading to subjugate the floor keeper. Edward notes that the 10th floor is vast and they lack the manpower to locate the remaining students. Unner reassures him, revealing that Kiki, the familiar he gave to Will, is a carbuncle linked to an orb in his possession. He confirms that Will's party is currently on the 11th floor. Meanwhile, Colette and Leanna walk the 11th floor, Colette dropping pieces of ore to mark their path. Colette asks how long they've been there, and Leanna replies it's been 16 hours with dwindling supplies. Colette acknowledges Leanna's efforts in getting them this far but worries about her stamina. Leanna apologizes, blaming herself for being too ambitious. Colette counters that the monster's sudden appearance on the 10th floor, and her uninvited presence, were not her fault. Grateful for Colette's understanding, Leanna reassures her that they'll be fine and that Will come to save them. Suddenly, they spot Will and the others approaching. They reunite with Cyan, who stands atop a pile of defeated sentinels. Wignall wonders if Cyan took them all down himself, but a bleeding Julius joins them, acknowledging his role in the battle, despite the number of clones he had to sacrifice. Cyan is surprised to see Will survived the 11th floor, and Will expresses relief that Julius is okay. They realize the girls are still missing. Meanwhile, Colette spots Professor Bruno, but Leanna stops her from rushing over. As Bruno's head drops, it's revealed that Headless was wearing it. He greets the girls, and questions his presence, noting he was supposed to manage things above. His friend surmises that the Duke monster must have failed to finish them off and that its rampage led the girls here. Mars is frustrated that their cover is blown. Colette, horrified, points her wand at Headless, realizing they killed Bruno. Headless crushes the professor's head, declaring themselves villains intent on destroying the fake sky. Colette understands they're referring to the Great Barrier of the Magia Vander, recalling the lore about calamity befalling the land if it falls. Headless announces his intent to take their heads, launching an attack. Will intervenes just in time, apologizing for being late, and the others join him. They explain to the girls that they tracked them thanks to Kiki and the ore trail. As they process this, they notice one of their attackers is Headless. Excited, Headless mentions how many cute heads he could add to his collection. Will charges, but as Headless strikes back, Colette and Wignall cushion his fall together. Headless is intrigued but is pulled away by Mars, who insists they need to hurry. In a shocking moment, Headless uses a spell from the Mage Queen Mercedes to summon Duke to their floor. The students are stunned as Will identifies the creature as an evil Grand Duke, a formidable monster worth 270 credits.